What's up, my friends? How's everyone doing this evening? Welcome to Carpo's channel. Now, tonight, unfortunately, I'm going to be talking about a subject that I really don't want to talk about. And you know, the funniest thing about this is, whenever I have a topic that I cover or want to talk about, and I figure, it's just too controversial, or else I can't get the words out I want to, then I end up just not uploading the video, like I did this morning with one that was about the term cisgender and relating to homophobia and all these different things. And I thought, it's just not worth it. The community, the people who are so sensitive that they can't even have a discussion about a topic without being offended about every little thing, make it nearly impossible to have discourse anymore. This happens all the time. And the internet has made it so much worse. It's easier for people to hide behind their screen names and their Twitter and rant at one another, which is what's happened right now with Joe Rogan and Bernie Sanders. I have to talk about this because originally I was going to just talk about Bernie and Joe, but then this whole this whole transphobe thing came up again while I was getting ready to make this video, and I thought, I guess I could ramble on about this, but I should get to the main point. Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie. Vaguely, okay, on his show the other day. Now, all he said was basically, hey, I like Bernie. He stood behind his principles. I'll probably vote for Bernie. The Bernie Sanders campaign used that and tweeted that clip out. And it started a fucking shitstorm of Twitter haters coming out of the woodwork. And I'd like to just read you one of them, because I don't use Twitter because it's a cesspool. I mean, I know that there's good people out there posting decent stuff, but it seems like when people are behind their keyboard, it's a lot easier to talk shit. And that's probably why I like speaking to the camera directly. This tweet came from this guy. I don't know who these people are, but it was from a Bernie and Warren thing. It was Mikey Franklin. He says, Joe Rogan is a transphobic bigot who shills for quackery and cuddles up to dangerous racists. Appearing on his show is bad but understandable. Publicizing his endorsement is indefensible. And my point here is that the extreme left, which are a small fraction, the warriors out there are really a small fraction of us. Because I lean left. I always have. And Joe leans left too. And the fact that people are calling him a right-wing, homophobic, transphobic bigot shows the absolute ignorance and that you know fucking nothing about Joe Rogan, okay? Years and years ago, somebody asked me what I thought of the Joe Rogan show, and I said, oh, it's okay. I don't know, it's all right. I hadn't watched many, and he hadn't really been podcasting that long. But over the years, I love to watch Joe. We watch Joe Rogan all the time. My wife and I and my son, and we love the shows. Not all of them. Sometimes he has a guest I don't want to hear from. The point is that he gives voices to everyone, and there is a section of people who don't believe that certain people should have a voice, even if they're extremely right-wing or whoever they may be. Let me say, if there is a safe space to hear people talk, it would be on the Joe Rogan show. And the fact that people are even accusing him of being, right-wing is totally out of line. And what really pissed me off was when I read a Vox article. It was the first one that came up when I was looking at it today. It was the one that inspired me to make this. And I was actually going to screenshot some of the bullshit that the Vox spit in there. But basically putting Joe down into the ditch, Look, you give a voice to your enemies sometimes. But Joe Rogan has no enemies. He's a guy who is open enough to discuss things with everyone. And he doesn't fall into anybody else's beliefs. I've listened to him carefully. He may not know exactly how he feels and believes about certain things, like the most of us. But when you're sitting there talking for 3 hours on live podcast, you're going to say some shit that maybe is misunderstood. So let me explain why everyone's calling him a transphobe. And this is what he said back in a podcast a couple of years ago, I believe. And he was talking about how he felt about, trans women. He said, I didn't have a dog in this fight. I was completely open and liberal about it, until there was a case where a man who had been a man for 30 years became a woman for a little less than 2 years, and then started MMA fighting women, beating the fuck out of these women, and then not proclaiming that he or she used to be a man. If you ever watched the fights, she wasn't winning because she was skillful. She was fucking manhandling these women. It was ugly. And I remember the podcast where he said that. And I actually totally agree with him. he also talks about how he doesn't agree with giving medication to young children, say 5 or younger, because they want to transition to a boy or a girl. You know, I don't give a shit about PC culture. I think it's totally wrong to give your young kid drugs because he says it wants to be a she or she says she wants to be a he. Look, the kid can decide that later. There are maybe some extreme cases, but the fact that this has become an issue is part of the problem. The fact that you can't even say a man who just became a woman should not be competing in sports with women. Is that transphobic? Is that really the society we live in now, where you can point to an actual rational fact that a person who was born as a man, who has broader shoulders, who generally has a stronger physique, not all men or not all women. The thing is, if you talk to top athletes, there was one lady who had been a trans supporter for like decades, and she came out herself and said she didn't agree with the fact that these, women should be competing, and she was labeled a transphobe. The community doesn't look into who people are. If you make a comment that people don't like, you're labeled. And let me just say for a minute, you're being labeled by people who have an issue with being labeled. Nobody likes to be labeled. Nobody likes to be judged. We all want to be ourselves and be free. And this was why earlier I made that video talking about how the term cisgender should not exist. I'm not a cisgender, I'm a man, right? Why do you need a name for, the average person? But whatever makes people feel comfortable. If a person dares speak out on that issue, then they're anti-Semitic or a homophobe or a transphobe. And you know what? It's getting to the point where the people are just going to not give a shit anymore. What I'm saying is that if you want to earn people's respect, you have to earn people's respect. You can't scream on them at Twitter and call them names and accuse them of things that they aren't. Because Joe Rogan is not a transphobe. He's not a homophobe. He's making rational statements based on his observations in the world. So, another thing they talk about is this idea about the Bernie bros and how all the Joe Rogan fans are all men and it's just a bunch of angry young men. It's a bunch of bullshit. They're getting scared because Bernie's actually moving up in the polls, and I get the feeling that he's putting a little bit of fear into the establishment. But this isn't about politics. This is more about the fact that Joe Rogan has 7 million followers, I believe, and millions of downloads of his podcasts. He has a much bigger voice. So when people say, well, what does his voice matter? It does matter. It matters more than a stupid actor in Hollywood spitting their little 2 cents from their little, high horse. And by the way, on that note, if you haven't seen Ricky Gervais tear into Hollywood at the Golden Globes, I highly recommend it. It's pretty humorous. It was his 5th year. I never watched that shit. I don't care about movies or Hollywood, but I heard that he really put him in their place for a few minutes. So I watched his whole opening, and he had them cringing. It's pretty good. I think that's what's happening right now. The coincidence about this is, talking about this whole woman joining the martial arts thing, is that South Park did an episode about that where Macho Man Randy Savage was dressed like a woman, basically, or was just claiming to be a woman and was beating all these women at these competitions, and how nobody in any of the competitions would speak up. They knew inside, and you could tell they were angry, but they figured it was not PC to speak up. And so the reason I'm speaking up about this is not to start controversy, not to start an argument, not to get views or to, create a big debate atmosphere. I just want to put in my 2 cents as a left-leaning, former liberal. I'm a liberal-minded person, but I refuse to associate with the modern liberal or what people call themselves as liberals. I feel like people have gone too far left, just like some have gone too far right. And for those who talk about how it's just a battle of Democrats and Republicans, it's not. There are more independents than there are Republicans or Democrats. And yes, everyone leans one direction or another. And this goes down to our genetics, the way our minds are programmed. They've done plenty of studies to show that there are more conservative-minded people, more liberal-minded people. This is just part of a society and the way that it operates. But we've got to the point now where a person can't even sit down and say, I'm voting for this candidate, without just being completely attacked. And even the fact that I myself endorsed Bernie Sanders, I voted for him last time, even though he wasn't really on the ticket, because I feel people have to make a point. I wasn't going to vote for Hillary. I couldn't stand her. And I couldn't stand Trump. So what do? But it doesn't matter what I say I did or didn't vote for, or how I feel or don't feel. People will label you. And the minute I come out and you say that, a woman, a man who just transitioned a year ago into a woman should not be in women's sports competing for prizes, I completely stand by that. And I will not ever back down from that standpoint. And anybody, I would imagine a lot of the people who disagree really know it's true deep down inside. Because I'm an empathetic, sympathetic person. I have a heart. I care about people and people's rights. But it's one thing to want to be accepted as a woman when you feel like a woman inside. It's another thing to jump right into sports and start whooping people's asses. What is that all about? You've got to know inside that that's just, that you have a different physique, right? And I brought this up about a year ago, talking about how men and women have different characteristics. And I actually got attacked on a video just saying that men and women had basic differences in the way that we think. There are plenty of scientific articles explaining how men see differently in our focal distance just through, evolution. But we've got to a point now where we can't even talk about it. Like Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist up in Evergreen State here in Washington. He was called a racist and a bigot, and basically they wanted him to resign from his class. He's one of the most well-spoken, intelligent, down-to-earth, rational people I've ever heard speak, and I would be honored to have him as my professor if I had ever had the opportunity to go to college. But his own class, tried to kick him out because they have a day where only the blacks go to school. It was a big controversy, and it's just this reverse discrimination that continues to go back and forth. One group feels discriminated or ridiculed, so they start discriminating against the other group. I saw it the first time in the 80s with rap, when especially it seemed like the black community and the rap community, NWA, fuck the police, they were pissed at the cops. Well, it moved on to, a lot of hate towards white people in general, which of course sold more records. But it was considered acceptable. And I always thought to myself as a kid, well, if I rapped about hating on black people, God, I'd get so much shit for that. But they can rap about us? I never understood that. And even as a kid, I knew there was something wrong there. But as I got older, I started to understand, as groups feel like they need to retaliate against whatever happened to their ancestors. Now look, I'm not a slave owner. I didn't take Native Americans' land either. I've been accused of being a racist merely because I have a color of skin, a white color of skin. So I have been bigoted. More people have been bigots to me than I've ever been a bigot to them, because of the fact that what my ancestors may have done, which isn't true because my grandparents came over from Europe just like many other people, and from Scotland, and probably they were ridiculed. We have a long history of arguing about stupid shit, but identity politics has taken a whole new turn now. It's always an us against them attitude. So, to come full circle, Joe Rogan, I think, is a great endorsement for Bernie Sanders. And I think those who are calling him a bigot, or calling anyone a bigot who has a viewpoint beyond their own, perhaps they need to check themselves. Because I'm really tired of hearing people say, check your privilege. I made the comparison to someone who, let me just say, just because you are trans does not mean that you have it harder than someone who's not trans overall. Let me just say, as an example, a beautiful, a man who identifies as a woman and actually looks pretty good as a woman, compared to a man who was just born a man and looks ugly, is totally short, hates himself, his shoulders and back are covered in hair, and he just feels awkward. He's marginalized just because he's considered to be the entitled white man, right? Or, check your privilege, white man. It's just bullshit. I'm just tired of reverse discrimination. I think the people are finally seeing through it. And I'd like to put this, just say to everyone, the extremists online don't represent most of the people. I'm glad I finally understand that. It took me a few years online to realize that most people aren't fanatical lunatics screaming at one another. It's just a few loud voices. And they just need to be put in their place. That's all. So everybody's going to have their own opinion. That's mine. Let me know yours. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.